Friday. It's Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. The obligatory reminder for you to support this channel and get notifications when we go live each and every weekday morning here with the Center Square on YouTube. But don't forget also you can get headlines in your inbox, get the newsletter at thecentersquare.com and the podcast where you get podcasts. Stuff to tackle today. Obviously, a lot of Illinois headlines to tackle. Everything from a bunch of homeschoolers up in Chicago rallying against the Homeschool Act. We'll also hear a little bit about nuclear energy down in Springfield. Some legislators wanting to lift the moratorium altogether, so we'll hear about that. But also, the Senate Executive Committee yesterday had two rather significant bills. Actually, a lot of the bills they discussed were rather significant, but one deals with requiring gun owners to have safe storage and a whole host of other things. So we'll hear that measure and the back and forth in the Senate committee. And ultimately, that safe gun storage bill did pass out of committee, as did the diversionary program that the Illinois State Rifle Association supported. That also passed unanimously. But we won't go into the diversionary program. We'll talk more about the safe gun storage because there are a lot of questions about that, and anticipations could lead to lawsuits. So we'll tackle that. But also, we got to tackle another measure that came out of the Senate Executive Committee dealing with recall of county-wide officials. And this happens to touch on something we've talked about on this program, and that is the murder of Sonia Massey in Springfield, a police-involved shooting death. And it's really sparked a lot of headlines and reached all the way up to, the election last year with both sides sounding off on it, and even the aftermath thereafter of how Illinois law could possibly be changed. And then you've got the entire justice aspect of this with the sheriff's deputy, former sheriff's deputy, being charged and being held pending trial. And that case has been in front of the Illinois Supreme Court. So a lot of different facets to that Sonia Massey story. But when it comes to what kind of legislation will happen at the State House, obviously, that's what we're going to get to. All right. So stay tuned. It's right here with Illinois in Focus Daily. Obviously, a lot going on today. The Illinois Senate is back in session. They'll probably be done early afternoon, which is good because that's when I've got my haircut scheduled. So we'll see how that happens and if we can get all that together. All right, so stay tuned. A lot to get to here. It's Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. If you join the live chat, you can hang out with the lively crowd in there. They're boisterous and vociferous, and you might even run into some bloviating. Who knows? By the way, I didn't realize how unknown the word bloviate is. Used it the other day in the office and had to give them the definition. I want to look that up. All right. Stay tuned. It's right here with Illinois in Focus Daily.
Where else do you lose the ability to have a right simply because of a failure to report a property crime? It doesn't exist anywhere else that I know of. And the first offense being a petty offense. So if a report is filed and it's a petty offense, you're now lowering the bar to losing a constitutional right based on a petty offense. I think that is some very intriguing new ground.
That is Todd Vandermeide. You can see him on YouTube's Freedom's Steel. He is obviously a former NRA lobbyist and a gun rights advocate. He was testifying yesterday virtually at the Illinois Senate Executive Committee about the Safe Gun Storage Bill. Welcome back. It's Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. The Senate Executive Committee passed this bill out of committee despite opposition. And this Senate Bill 8 is something that you've got a lot of opposition to it. Let's just go ahead and pull up where you can see the opposition. If you go to ilga.gov, then you type in down here, bill number by SB 8, you hit enter, and then you can see here the explanation of the bill, the synopsis, and Senate committee's amendments that were put in. And there are some changes that we'll touch on here. But if you look at the witness slips, and the witness slips are really a gauge of the public's sentiment here. All right, so 710 people support this one, 3,200 oppose it. Despite that, the measure passing out of committee yesterday. So the measure, obviously, a lot of debate around it. It's from Laura Ellman, a Democrat, and she explains various aspects of her bill yesterday.
Yes. It creates the Safe Gun Storage Act, prohibiting a firearm owner from storing or keeping any firearm in the premises where they know or reasonably should know that a minor, an at-risk person, or a prohibited person is likely to gain access to the firearm. It amends the Criminal Code of 2012 to provide that it's unlawful for any persons to store or leave a firearm if the person knows or reasonably should know that a minor who does not have a FOID card is likely to gain access to the firearm, and the minor causes death or great bodily harm with the firearm, unless certain provisions apply. Amends the Criminal Code of 2012 to provide that, in addition to the current criminal penalty, a person's FOID card must be revoked after a second or subsequent violation of the criminal offense of failure to report a lost or stolen firearm. 3 more, amends the FOID Card Act to provide that the internet database of FOID card owners must include a written notice of a firearm owner's obligation to report a lost or stolen firearm within 48 hours. And 2 more. Thank you very much. It requires the state police to establish an electronic mechanism by which law enforcement must report individuals who have failed to report the loss of a theft of a firearm. Furthermore, and finally, it requires the court at the time of sentencing to make a finding of whether a firearm with a serial number reported as stolen on the Illinois State Police Public Database was used in the commission of the offense for which the defendant is being sentenced.
So those are the 7 aspects that this bill has, Senate Bill 8, and creates the Safe Gun Storage Act, requires you to report within 48 hours, and you can be charged civilly, and a whole host of other things. Illinois State Rifle Association's Ed Sullivan, we've talked to him about this, and he was there to testify yesterday evening, and he really laid into where people are expected to have safe storage when they are in possession of a firearm.
Definition of premises says your home, your car, your place of work, or anywhere that you're under control of. And so if you're a manager of a restaurant, you're potentially under control of that, and would you have to have safe storage there? So that leads us to believe that you're going to have multiple safe storage devices, which certainly increases the costs. I'll bring to your attention from the Supreme Court ruling of State Rifle and Pistol Association for Bruin, page 30.9, and I'm paraphrasing, that said, because any permitting scheme can be put towards abusive ends, we do not rule out constitutional challenges to shall issue regimes where, for example, lengthy wait times in processing license applications or exorbitant fees deny ordinary citizens the right to publicly carry. So what is exorbitant fees? Obviously that would have to be brought before the courts and they would have to make a ruling on that. But when you have a Concealed Carry Act in the state of Illinois where it's $150 to get the license, it's another $200 to $250 to take the courses, and now you're going to require someone to have a safe storage device that is going to be a minimum of $50, potentially multiple. Do we cross the Bruin threshold? Obviously, that would have to be litigated.
So clearly, some kind of signals there that there are things within this that are running afoul with Supreme Court precedent, according to the gun rights advocates. Ed Sullivan continuing, not just talking about the places that people are going to have to secure their firearms, in home, a place of business, in a car. It's also the issue of who is considered a prohibited person. There is some kind of clarification here that the sponsor had, but even then, Sullivan talking about, okay, if you want to move it from 14 years old to 18 years old when you have to have a firearm in a safe at home, okay, you can see that as possibly being the focus of what the bill portends to be about, and the advocates say it's meant to keep firearms out of the hands of children if they might not be safe with it, or other people at risk. Here's Sullivan addressing that.
But you now add in what's called an at-risk person. And so our concern is, how do we know who an at-risk person is? If I invite a service provider to come work on my pool or my telephone or my cable, and they're an at-risk person, how would I know that? Because the definition says if they have stated certain acts. I wouldn't know if they have stated certain acts. Would they have to say them in front of me? Then potentially that would take place. The second one is the definition of a prohibited person. So what I can say is, from previous renditions of this bill, they have changed the definition of prohibited person. Prior, it was anybody that didn't have a FOID card under Illinois is prohibited from possessing a firearm. Now they've changed that, so that's a good start, obviously, for what we would consider a problem. But if someone is from out of state, if they come to Illinois, certainly we allow hunting, and so they wouldn't have a FOID card. But if they're not coming to hunt, are they considered a prohibited person? I've started a discussion with state police, and we're toying with that idea, so that potentially might need to be clarified. But you got, Aunt Susie that lives in Wisconsin comes to your home, you knowingly allow them to come in your home, and something happens, is that person a prohibited person?
So clearly questions about that as well, things that might have to be defined by a court eventually, and the legislative record having to be built, and that's what this is all about, going through the process of the committee hearings. And again, this is just the first step, right? Spoiler alert, I already said this, but the bill passed out of committee. And this is just one step. Still got to get to the Senate floor, where they would then possibly vote on it, and then it would have to go to the House, and then the committee process, and then the House would have to pass it. All of this is going to happen, by the way, by May 31st. Not just for this bill, but everything else that's coming in and out of the Illinois House and Illinois Senate. But there's also the issue of civil liability, and that's something that Sullivan said is a major problem here, because he spells out that, listen, the way this is being presented is, if somebody's firearm stolen and used in a crime, then that individual who owned the firearm that was the victim of a property crime could be held civilly liable by the victim of whoever pulled the trigger or whatever ended up happening with that stolen piece of equipment.
Someone breaks into my house, steals my firearm, because they've now obtained my firearm. They can use, and let's say they sell the firearm, or they use it in a crime. The victim of that crime can now come back and sue the person that had the firearm stolen from. So think about that. A property crime where a victim, a third party, creates the problem, kills somebody, uses it in a crime, whatever, they can now come back to me, and I was the victim of a property crime. That, by case law, has been declared unconstitutional.
We'll hear more about that, I imagine, that particular case law, and that's something that Todd Vandermeide, also yesterday, testifying in front of this committee, laid out, and he kind of distills it down to what the major concern is here about possibly, having a loss of your rights for not reporting something to law enforcement if something's stolen or wrong.
Where else do you lose the ability to have a right simply because of a failure to report a property crime? It doesn't exist anywhere else that I know of. And the first offense being a petty offense. So if a report is filed and it's a petty offense, you're now lowering the bar to losing a constitutional right based on a petty offense. I think that is some very intriguing new ground.
So Vandermeide obviously distilling that question down, right, as to the impact of this. Then it got to some of the questions from members of the committee. State Senator Neil Anderson, who's filed year after year after year measures to try to end the FOID card. He asked Laura Ellman, the sponsor of this measure, a question about what her understanding is of how this measure could pass the Bruin tests.
Senator, how does this bill stand up to the Bruin test in your mind?
One moment.
You can see she's discussing with staff to kind of get a better understanding of what that question is. And after a few moments of, asking, well, what's your question again? And then going back to the staff member, the senator sponsoring this measure defers the question.
Hold up to the Bruin test.
Senator, to be frank, I am not super familiar with the Bruin test.
Sure.
So I'm going to
Okay. No, that's fine.
defer.
That's
Thank
fine.
you.
And I think the Bruin test, the New York Bruin case, Supreme Court, one of the things that was laid out there in that decision is that courts have to make sure that any law is within, I think the language is traditional firearm carry and use. So I think this goes back to your question, Mr. President, is requiring a lockbox, does that come down to traditional use of firearms? And I think that's something that we don't know, but I would argue that it is not.
So the question again is, does this pass that text, history, and tradition test of Bruin, right? And we can go deep into the path of what the New York State Rifle Association v. Bruin case ultimately led to, with the Supreme Court saying you have to, number one, it has to have text, history, and tradition. Look at the texts. Does the law violate the plain text of the Second Amendment? And then after that, then you go and look and see if they similar historical analogs, similar laws or measures that were from around the time of the founding, does this law that this state has on gun rights impact that, or does it reflect that? So it's the text, history, and tradition type of thing. Senate President Don Harmon lays out that he thinks that gun storage probably is within that history.
It seems to have been lost on the Supreme Court that traditionally there were cities and villages that required you to surrender your firearms at the border before the founding. So I don't think that requiring safe storage is at all inconsistent with the founding principles.
I guess we'll see what the courts say if indeed this moves forward. But Senator Anderson had another idea that he wanted to make sure the sponsor of the bill heard, and that is the idea of making sure people aren't ignorant about firearms, because it seems to be an effort to try to keep firearms out of the hands of people who don't know firearms. Well, Senator Anderson says that Laura Ellman should hop on with his bill to address that issue at an early age.
What has to do with your bill, I think, is you're trying to address ignorance of young ones trying, not getting access to that. Which is why I would ask you to please sign on to my Senate Bill 1210. It is a bill that will bring back teaching gun safety in our schools. And I think we can get rid of a lot of the ignorance. My kids have been shooting since they were old enough to hold a firearm, and they know not to mess with them. Because they're not ignorant to it. And I think if we can teach our kids a healthy respect for firearms, I think we'd see a lot less problems.
So obviously the measure passed in committee yesterday. Like I said, still some other steps before it gets onto the governor's desk. We'll be tracking that bill. Another bill that advanced out of that committee, the State Rifle Association actually supports, and that is to have a diversionary program for first-time nonviolent weapons offenders in an effort to ultimately say that their rights aren't going to be completely destroyed as they go through that process. And instead of having that criminal charge, they go into a diversion program. So State Rifle Association supported that because they say that some of their members who haven't registered semi-automatic firearms banned by state law could get popped, and that would be a first-time nonviolent weapons offense. another measure that made it through. All right, it's Illinois Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. If you like what you see here each and every weekday morning, get the podcasts, get the newsletter, go to thecentersquare.com.
Gives too much power to groups to influence the process. Nothing would stop someone from trying immediately after a contentious election to immediately file for a petition to recall. And that puts people in a revolving, every 2 years you're going to be looking to run again.
That's Illinois Sheriff's Association Executive Director Jim Kychek yesterday during the Senate Executive Committee on a bill that would allow for county boards to ask voters if they want to allow for the recall of a countywide office holder. It's Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and get the newsletter in your inbox. Just go to thecentersquare.com. So part of the questions of ethics in Illinois has been, how do we keep bad actors from doing bad stuff, right? And there's tons of different answers for that. Everything from term limits to, more criminal liability and such, but we don't really see too many movement on these types of pieces of legislation. There's also been a conversation, especially in Chicago, with the issue of recall, and can we recall certain elected officials? Now, we do have recall for the Illinois governor, but people argue that it's far too high of a burden to supersede, too high of a hurdle to jump over, and makes it difficult for people to try to even recall the governor. And the recall amendment came about after the whole Blagojevich saga, but we have limited powers when it comes to being able to recall local elected officials or even state house members or members of Congress, for instance. So when it comes to the issue of recall, it surfaced back up, not just with the ethics conversation, but with what happened, I believe, last year. Sonia Massey, a Springfield resident, calling the local county sheriffs, the Sangamon County sheriffs, about a prowler that she felt was outside her house. When the sheriff's deputy showed up, she ended up being shot 3 times or something like that and died. And the sheriff's deputy who pulled that trigger faces murder charges and is currently behind bars while the Illinois Supreme Court deals with whether or not he's going to be free pending trial. So that's an entirely different conversation. But locally in Sangamon County, and you guys may have remembered this, there was immense pressure on the Sangamon County Sheriff, Jack Campbell, at that time to resign. And then they had, a citizen movement to have a recall of the sheriff because they felt that the sheriff hired this deputy who pulled the trigger and shouldn't have, because the deputy had a checkered past of sorts. So there was a lot of calls for Sheriff Campbell to either step down or to be recalled. And the Sangamon County Board said, we don't know if we can do a recall. We have to have the legislature provide more clarity on recall. So ultimately, though, Campbell, he did resign. He retired. And that was after immense pressure. Even the governor of Illinois, if you guys recall, you can go back and look at the archives of this show and you'll see that. But the governor, for like a week straight, was asked about should Sheriff Jack Campbell resign. And Pritzker was pretty adamant. So State Senator Doris Turner, Democrat from Springfield, she spelled out her measure that would ultimately allow for the recall of certain county-wide state office holders in this bill passing the Senate Executive Committee yesterday.
This bill, Senate Bill 1954, is an opportunity to address a concern that my constituency had in order to clarify whether they have the opportunity to recall a countywide elected official. Again, this legislation, when passed and signed by the governor, will provide counties and the county boards an opportunity to put this on the ballot at the 2026 election only, and then sets about a process by which you can move forward with recall of a countywide elected official.
And it's one of those things where the county has to approve it for the citizens to be able to sound off on it. And it wouldn't be for every county-wide elected office. It wouldn't be for any other elected office like state house or mayor or school board member or things like just county-wide office holders. So, like a clerk or a sheriff, for instance. So here is the Illinois Sheriff's Association's Jim Kychek, you heard at the beginning there, talking about how they support another measure that Senator Turner has concerning some reforms that law enforcement could implement. And here's him talking about that particular aspect. Dan, go.
It's one of the reasons why ultimately you saw us as a support on Senate Bill 1953, trying to address the issues of background and investigation on employees to get the information that's necessary to try to keep people from this from taking the position or getting the position. I also want to express my condolences to the Massey family for all they've been through. This is certainly something that law enforcement is not proud of at all. And it pains me to be here today because of those things.
So Kychek wants to make sure that things are above board. Turner has two bills right next to each other that touch on this. It's Senate Bill 1953, Police Records and Sheriff Board is what it is. And we'll take a look at this real briefly here. This was not what was being discussed yesterday. So let's pull this up. In the overview, it amends the Police Training Act, provides no law enforcement agency shall make an offer of employment to the position of probationary police officer and other positions. Continuing here, if the individual to produce and make available for inspection employment records, including background investigation materials collected in connection with making an offer of employment, duty-related physical and psychological fitness for duty exams, and really just provides for more oversight of previous employment records and such. But that, again, is not the measure that they were discussing yesterday. The measure they were discussing was giving the county board in a county outside of Cook County, because apparently Cook County has this, to do recall of county-wide elected officials. And Kychek says, listen, I understand that, but he worries that recall could be abused.
I think the challenge that we run into with this particular issue is that we're just talking about county-wide offices here. We're not talking about county board members. We're not talking about other elected officials. So we're holding people to a different standard, and I think that's something that we would like to see further explored. I certainly do want to recognize the efforts, again, that Senator Turner has made in terms of getting to where we are. She and I have had probably to ad nauseum for her many conversations about this. But with that said, she's always been gracious in those conversations. The other questions or issues that we've got is that this undermines the principles, potentially, of electing good officials. They're always going to be concerned about making decisions that are right for the communities that they represent. And sometimes those decisions are difficult ones to make. We believe it gives too much power to groups to influence the process. Nothing would stop someone from trying immediately after a contentious election to immediately file for a petition to recall. And that puts people in a revolving, every 2 years you're going to be looking to run again.
So couldn't that make for just tumultuous times, especially in a district where the race was 51 to 49, and then all of a sudden this community comes together and they push for a recall and they get out in the media and just drum this up, and then you get into this constant conflict, and how it could possibly be abused. Senator Sue Rezin, a Republican from Morris, she also shared some of the possible problems she sees with this.
For example, say the state's attorney prosecutes someone, and it's just not a popular case, but it is the right thing to do, and a group decides that they want to implement this recall process against the state's attorney. So, my concern, I understand what you're trying to do, but my concern is that it may also give certain groups, as the previous person said, a little more power than they deserve in trying to remove an elected official, county elected official, who maybe is making a difficult decision that may not be popular.
And it's interesting to hear these arguments. Again, sometimes in the ethics conversation we have at the State House, and I know ethics have been elusive when it comes to getting new reforms in place to hold people accountable before federal prosecutors step in 10 years after the fact. But recall has been one of those things in the conversation. You've even had Democrats in Chicago looking to have an easier path to recall the Chicago mayor, for instance. But when it's, a targeted type of recall, which this seems to be, again, it would only be for countywide office holders, excluding the treasurer. Apparently, there are already provisions in law, according to Doris Turner, that the treasurer can be recalled, but not for any other local countywide elected office holders. But, it's not just Republicans pushing back on this. You've got Democratic State Senator Laura Murphy pushing back on this as well, saying she's not a fan of the idea of recall.
Question that when a community member is murdered by those that should be in a trusted position, there's a response that's required. However, I am concerned about recall because I believe the problem for me with recall is it negates a vote, the voters' ability to elect officials, and then you are totally disenfranchising those that voted for a particular person, and then you're removing them from office. And that is totally contrary to what the voters' wishes had been. And so...
And it disenfranchises, that's what she says. We'll see how this goes. There seems to be bipartisan opposition to this idea and more of a willingness to take up other measures, like saying, hey, sheriffs have to really comb through a potential candidate's record when it comes to a position on the sheriff's department and other law enforcement agencies. All right, it's Illinois in Focus Daily. That passed out of committee. We'll obviously track that to see how far that goes throughout the legislature. It's what I do every day. Go to the State House, watch these guys do what they do, and report it back to you here with Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Here with YouTube each and every weekday morning at 8 o'clock live. Get the segments, get the news clips, not just of Illinois, but all across the country. We've got a great team at the Center Square, and get the headlines in your inbox. Go to thecentersquare.com and sign up for that newsletter. From homeschoolers rallying in Chicago to the Senate passing all kinds of bills to measures being proposed to lift the nuclear moratorium, it was a busy day yesterday across the state when it comes to issues at the Illinois State House. I'm Greg Bishop, Associate Editor for the State of Illinois with the Center Square, and you can find the headlines my team and I put together at thecentersquare.com/Illinois, where you can also sign up for that newsletter to get the headlines in your inbox each and every weekday morning. All right, where are we at here? There we are. All right, so let's go to thecentersquare.com, and we've already talked this morning about the bill to allow for recall. We talked about the Senate Executive Committee meeting to discuss the issue of safe gun storage, but Jim Talamonte, our reporter out of Chicago yesterday, he was able to go downtown and witness and report on the rally of homeschool families that rallied at Daley Plaza in downtown Springfield. So let's just go to Jim's story here and read a little bit of it. Parents and community leaders speaking out against legislation at the Illinois State House that would punish homeschool families if they don't comply with new state government reporting mandates. And as you can see there, a fair amount of families with tons of microphones from Chicago media, homeschool advocates on the location of Daley Plaza. Now, we talked about House Bill 2827, and if you haven't seen that, we actually put the entirety of the debate on that on our YouTube channel. So you can find the debate about the Homeschool Act on the Center Square's YouTube channel. But the legislation from State Representative Tara Costa Howard did advance out of the House committee last week. Possibly we could see amendments, but the sponsor said it's time for Illinois to come into terms with 38 other states, she said, has more regulations on homeschooling. You have Pastor Chris Butler, State Representative LaShawn Ford, others who were talking during this rally. And let's just watch and hear a little bit of what's going on. Vote no. Chanting vote no. That's a fair amount of people there.
You can support. But right now, I don't believe the bill is exactly what's needed in Illinois.
Amen. Yeah!
That's Representative Ford. He's been opposed to this.
Restorative justice, I believe, and making sure that people don't have a pathway to the justice system, the criminal justice system, and this bill is a pipeline to the criminal justice system for parents, and I can't stand for that. How can we criminalize parents for wanting to love their children?
It's an interesting perspective LaShawn Ford has there. Ford is definitely a proponent of reforming the criminal justice system and making sure that there are things to divert somebody from being on the path towards imprisonment, right? So he will regularly oppose things like penalty enhancements. That's another conversation that's had at the State House all the time. Democrats don't want penalty enhancements for things like drugs or driving or things like that because they feel it compounds on those who are least able to afford those types of penalties and fines. So they don't want penalty enhancements. But sometimes Republicans are looking for penalty enhancements as like a deterrent of sorts, right? So interesting to hear LaShawn Ford bring that into this conversation of sorts, saying that all this bill is going to do is set parents up to be on that path to getting fines or to getting, possibly even jail time. Here is Pastor. Who was this? Pastor Chris Butler. He was there as well, sharing some of his thoughts.
It's just a form, they say, but it creates a new pathway to criminalization. Right. Because this form, if you neglect to fill it out, this form, if you forget to fill it out, this form, if you fill it out and an overburdened administrator loses it, this form says that if they don't get it, your child is automatically considered a chronic truant and you are considered guilty of a Class C misdemeanor. That's right. You are immediately subject to a $500 fine. You are immediately threatened with 30 days in jail. They say it's just a form, but I say it might be more. That's right. 7 represents a massive threat to the most hopeful movement taking place in our education society today. Amen. We preach. I've been an education advocate practically all my life. We preach that we want parents to be involved. These parents who are homeschooling their children are doing just that, and we should do nothing in the state of Illinois to hinder them. Thank you so much.
So I appreciate Jim Talamonte getting that video together and reporting on that, as we'll see this bill come up possibly by the end of next week in the House, and then it could possibly be kicked over to the Illinois Senate. So what's going to happen there? Are they even going to get enough Democrats to pass this thing? They only need 61 votes to get it out of the House before May 31st, and there's 78 Democrats. So that would mean you've got a lot of Democrats that could not have to vote for this. Other news, go to thecentersquare.com/Illinois, and you'll be able to see the headlines, including a couple of State House Republicans wanting to expand nuclear power in Illinois. And this is coming from State Senator Sue Rezin, State Senator Terry Bryant, and State Senator Sally Turner. They all say that we need more nuclear power. If you recall, a few weeks ago, we had some renewable energy advocates asking for the law to expand for allowing for battery storage from wind and solar, and they said that by 2030, the energy needs are going to be through the roof, and that's because of AI and self-driving, or supercomputers and quantum computers and electric vehicles, and they didn't say it was because they're forcing coal-fired power plants to go offline in Illinois. When I asked if it was premature to do that, they said, no, everything's been kind of going that way anyways. So regardless, the needs for energy in Illinois continue to increase. The costs continue to increase. Republicans at the State House and some Democrats as well, they came together and they did get a lifting of the nuclear moratorium last year. The governor signed, but it was only for small modular reactors. And these are yet to be fully developed, still probably years off from actually coming together, but we could get some small modular nuclear reactors in Illinois. But the big traditional ones, now Republicans are looking to lift the moratorium altogether and to allow for even the expansion or the building of new, much larger nuclear power plants.
Acknowledge the immediate pressures on our grid. Data centers are consuming enormous amounts of energy. Senator Resin's legislation ensures that foreign adversary-owned data centers do not worsen this problem. While we work on long-term solutions, like expanding nuclear power, we also need to implement policies that prevent unnecessary strain on our grid today. So Illinois families deserve policies that work for them instead of against them. Lower energy costs, economic expansion, and workforce stability will provide meaningful benefits for every household in our state. This is about more than just energy, more than just about electricity. It's about our state's future.
My district is home to Clinton Nuclear Plant, a vital part of our local economy and a key source of reliable energy for our state. Nuclear power provides good-paying jobs, ensures that our communities have access to stable, carbon-free electricity. However, Illinois has been slow to embrace new nuclear development, and we need to change that. The demand for electricity is growing at historic pace, driven by advancements in technology and industry. If we want to remain competitive, we must invest in the next generation of nuclear power.
So you've got the push on to lift that nuclear moratorium, something that was part of the conversation yesterday at the State House. But also at the State House with the Senate in, they passed several measures, just a couple that passed unanimously, dealing with veterans. They're looking to allow for households that have one or more veterans that are reaching a certain income threshold to have access to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP. Of course, it's got pending federal rules, but they have another one that says new veteran homes that are built for veterans that are smaller are not required to have electric vehicle charging. It's another law they passed several years ago to require new homes to have electric vehicle installation for chargers, but they want to try to make sure they put that mandate away for veterans. So that also passed unanimously out of the Senate. Just a few of the things. They passed a bunch of bills out of the Senate yesterday. Go to thecentersquare.com, stay up to date, and follow us anywhere you find the Center Square. All right, make it happen. All right, so all I got for you on this Friday. Got to get out of here, go back to the Senate, watch what's going on. They're going to be in until probably midday, and then I got to go get that haircut I've been telling you guys about, as you guys are definitely taking me to the ringer sometimes when my blow dryer and the hairspray gets a little out of hand. All right, have a great Friday. We'll see you back here Monday morning. Next week is going to be a barn burner. Both chambers are in, and they've got deadlines to get bills out of their chamber, so stuff's going to be flying fast and furious. And it's going to be an exhausting week. Hopefully you'll join me every weekday morning here with the Center Square on YouTube. Get the podcast if you can't get podcasts. Get the news clips and shorts at the Center Square on YouTube, and get the newsletter in your inbox at thecentersquare.com.
Home.